Welcome back to Joyful Homestead. We're Dan and Heidi, and today it is time to tackle a huge subject. We do an awful lot of canning here at this house, but we've had a lot of people ask, can you please make a video on it? So today's is pressure canning. We'll make sure you understand the difference between it and water bath canning and all the steps so that you are not afraid of it.
People are really curious about canning. If you think of homesteading, one of the first things that comes to mind is canning. And so we'd love to just share that today, and let's have some fun.
Yeah, let's get started. Our kitchen is all set up now. This is the harvest time for sweet potatoes, and so we have decided that some would go into cold storage and some would be canned. It's the perfect time when you've harvested anything or when something came into harvest time at your local marketplace, your farmer's market, that you want to do something with it. So it's time for us to do pressure canning for sweet potatoes, and we need to understand first the difference between the pressure canning and water bath canning.
Right. Well, you have to understand that the idea of canning, preserving food by canning, is simply to keep food from spoiling, right? And so there are two ways that food is kept from spoiling when we talk about canning. One is heat and pressure. That's what we're talking about with the pressure canning. Water bath canning uses an acidic environment in order to kill the things that would spoil your food. And that's the difference between the two. And really it's dependent on what kind of food you're canning, because the things that you would water bath can are things that are acidic in nature, or you can add acid like lemon juice or something like that, and it won't ruin the taste. For example, sweet potatoes, if you add lemon to that, it's just not really.
That would be gross.
Right, exactly. So that's why we pressure can sweet potatoes. But things like jams or fruit, pickles, obviously pickles have a brine, a salty brine that kills all of those things and can then be preserved in that solution. So what we're talking about with pressure canning is vegetables, meats, different things like that that don't have any acid and need to be cooked at a higher temperature and pressure.
Okay, so since we're doing pressure canning, we are all set up with the tools that you'll need exactly for that.
Well, let's walk through them. So you've got the jars, that's obvious. You got this with a standard mouth, which are the smaller, and then you've got the wide mouth, which actually is kind of nice sometimes to be able to put some of your product in there a little easier, get your hands in there for sure. They need to be sterilized. We recommend highly to just buy the jars that are made for pressure canning. Go to the store. They usually come in 12 in a case, and they usually come with the lids and the bands, which is nice. Speaking of lids, you can get them separate, but they do, like I said, come with the jars. Typically, you want them sterilized as well. I use this little pincher device, which is nice. It's a jar lifter. Keep your hands out of the hot water.
You do not want to burn yourself.
That's for sure.
Always remove jars with that.
And that's great for both kinds of canning. And then the last thing and the most important thing is the pressure canner itself.
Yes. When I started shopping for these, we had borrowed my parents for a little while. We decided, okay, it's time to buy our own. We just bought the baseline model. There are ones with dials on top. There are digital ones, and those are fancy and wonderful, but we didn't really want to spend the money when we first started down this road. So this was a base model, and actually having this type ended up being Dan's favorite.
Right.
Tell them about the calibration.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have the digital one or you have the dial one, there's calibration that needs to be involved. In other words, you need to have it standardized, right?
Once a year.
Right, and this is just physics. So the little thing does a little hula dance, and as fast as it goes means the pressure, and you have the different weights on it. It's really just pretty simple. And if you understand it, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, and these don't change.
Right. This is the difference between water bath and pressure canning, because water bath canning, you can just use a standard stock pot and just boil the water in there. But the pressure, this actually gets the temperature up over 146 degrees, which is obviously higher than boiling point. And it has to do that because some of the foods that we will can, and especially meats, you get botulism if you don't do it right. And of course, that's very rare, but you want to make sure to do it very precisely.
For sure. Next comes the filling of the jars. We didn't mention this at the beginning with the tools, but we've just gotten it out now. This funnel is so important because not only does it make it less of a mess as you put in your chunks of things. But when it's time to put in the liquids, you're really gonna want a funnel like this. So we're gonna put a link in the description below for this particular product too, because it's just invaluable. So I'm starting to put sweet potato, just bite-sized chunks, into my jar, and they are raw because they're gonna have plenty of cooking time in the canner. Same thing with other vegetables, like for example, green beans. You're gonna wanna snap the ends off and then you're gonna pack them raw because they're gonna cook just fine. Now, for meats, I do that differently. My ground beef, I brown it first and then I put it in. Same thing with my turkey. I cook it fully. You may see online, I've seen opinions about just, you don't need to cook it fully, cook it halfway with your turkey, but I would rather cook it fully and be able to just cleanly debone it and then go from there and pack. When I make a soup, it's a cooked meat and then a raw vegetable in my broth.
Now, once your jars are filled, it's time to put the liquid in and start your pressure canning. You want to fill the jars to the shoulder, not too overfilled. And the reason for that is because you have liquid to put in, and then you need to have about a 1-inch headspace anytime you can. It's real important for that space to be in there.
Right. You know what we didn't show you that we did ahead of time, we should probably mention, this is super important, is that these jars were sanitized before we filled them. So the best two ways are?
Yeah, so the way I typically do it if I have time is I put all the jars I'm going to use to can in the dishwasher on the sanitized cycle. There's typically a cycle that does extra heat or whatever in order to sterilize those jars. If you don't have that time, then you can go ahead and you can boil some water. I use my special tea kettle here, and then I'll boil the water and I'll pour it to the very top, and that will sanitize the inside of the jars. And you do that with the lids as well. These lids are in here in a Pyrex, and we just basically pour boiling water on that. Basically, you want anything that will touch the food or be on the inside of the jar to be sterilized.
Okay, the next step is the liquids. We have filtered water in our house. We use it for the most part for vegetables. So now when we do meats, I really prefer broth. And then especially when I'm doing a soup, I put in my broth and my spices along with my meat and my vegetables, which leads us then to temperatures. Because if you're making a soup out of a hot meat, and if you're using a broth that you just cooked, we got to talk about temperatures, and that's really important.
That's right. What we're doing is cold packing, and that means that all of the components are basically room temperature, meaning that the water in the pressure canner, the sweet potatoes, and the water, and the jars themselves are all about the same temperature. That's the important part. You never want to add hot food to a cold jar and put it in cold water, because then you have the potential for that glass to crack and to break. So especially with meats, if you have a hot meat, you want to put a hot or a warm at least broth on it, and then warm your water up in your pressure canner before you actually put the jars in. So as we are packing here, we pack the 3 and then just the 1 here now. You want to make sure that that water covers the surface of the sweet potatoes, and you also want to make sure you have about 1 inch of headspace to the top lip of the jar. Then we always take a plastic or a wooden utensil, never metal, because metal again can crack, potentially physically impair that jar inside. So you just do this.
Not using metal.
That's right. And the reason you do this is because you want some of the bubbles that capture under there, some air pockets, to come out. And that just does that. And then basically at this point, you're ready to place the lids and the bands and put it in the pressure canner.
Okay, I'm excited. Okay guys, we're on the home stretch here. They are almost ready to go in the canner. We have put the lids on, but right before that, you're going to take a clean cloth and just wipe the rim. You want to make sure there's no residue of any food particles that would ruin the sealing process.
And talking about the rings, basically once that lid is on there, you'll want to go ahead and tighten that ring tight and then back it off just a little bit. Now, I've never had a can not seal. And I think a lot of it is because I do that process of backing it off. What happens when you pressure can is the pressure builds up in the jar, and then it pushes all of the air out of the jar. It needs somewhere to go, and if you have this tight, then that won't be able to go anywhere, that air. And so you push it out, and then later on you can tighten it back up again. But that makes that seat and seal perfectly.
Right. You'll tighten it back up after it's completely done.
That is correct. All right, let's talk about the pressure canner itself. There are several different pieces. One is this plate that keeps the jars up off of the heat. It's good to keep the jars away from direct contact with heat. Second thing that you will have is a pressure gauge that fits on top of the apparatus. It is a pressure gauge with two 5-pound rings. Each of these pieces represents 5 pounds of pressure. With sweet potatoes, we have one ring, that's 10 pounds of pressure that we will cook with. Of course, refer to your manual for the amount of pressure depending on what food that you are cooking. And then the third thing that we'll be looking at is the lid, okay? And the lid just slides right on, and of course, this gauge goes on top. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and fill our jars into the vessel, and we'll start heating it up. When you start your canner, you want to make sure that you have 3 quarts of water in the bottom of it. It's a little different than water bath canning, because water bath canning, you actually cover your jars. You only need a little bit of water in a pressure canner. Now I'm going to put 4 jars in here, 4-quart jars. I would probably be able to fit 2 more in here if we had them, but you can go ahead with a smaller load. You just want to make sure that you don't have it so tight that the jars are pushing up against each other, because that can cause them to break. So we'll just spread them out here. Of course, this is cold packed, remember, so I'm actually not using my pinchers. There's nothing hot here. If this water was hot for some reason, or the jars themselves, I could use that pincher device and go ahead and put them down in. So I'm going to reach over here and get the lid, and it's going to be a little noisy on the camera, but it slides like that. There are grooves in the lid that seat, and it just slides so that the knobs are together. That's important because you need this pressure to build up in here. All right, so remember, 10 pounds of pressure. Oh, I'm not going to put that on yet, because what you have to do is you have to go ahead and turn your burner on, okay? So I turned the burner on high heat, and what this is going to do is start build up pressure. I will know that it's ready for the little gauge to be put on when I see a column of steam coming out the top. When I see a consistent column of steam coming out the top, and I'll probably actually hear the boiling water inside, that's the point at which I'll go ahead and put this gauge on here. It typically takes 10 or so minutes for that to happen, so be patient with it. Once the gauge is on, then you want to listen for the gauge to start doing what I call a little hula dance, and it'll start moving. We'll show you that in a little bit once this starts up, but it'll just be moving like this. You don't want it to be banging really hard. You want it to be slow, even just a couple of movements per minute to a little bit of a hula dance is what I call it. So we'll go ahead and show you exactly what that looks like when this heats up. All right, we've been watching the pressure canner for a bit, and we have a column of steam, which is our sign to go ahead and put the rocker, 10 pounds of pressure, on top, just like that. Now we'll wait for it to start rocking, and then we'll be at our next stage. All right, a few more minutes have passed, and now we have the rocker doing its little dance, and so we are going to go ahead and make sure that we settle it in to where it's not too violent. So we're going to move it from high temperature to about medium, and we'll want just that slow rock for about 90 minutes. Now you'll want to refer to your manual for any food that you do as far as cooking time. Our manual says sweet potatoes are cooked for 90 minutes, and our timer will start now. After your cooking time is complete, you'll want to turn off the heat, but don't do anything to open your pressure canner. You want to pull the pressure canner off the heat source and let it sit until it manually will release the pressure. This is the part where most people get really kind of nervous or anxious, because there's a lot of pressure built up here, and people have heard stories about pressure canners exploding or whatever. But it's really actually very simple. If you allow the the pressure to release on its own manually, then everything is actually very safe. So let's let it sit for a little bit. All right, some more time has passed and the pressure is released. One way you can find if the pressure is down enough is just to turn the rocker to the side. If you don't have any pressure released, then you know that it's low. You can take this part off then at that point, and if there isn't any steam rising from the spout, it's time to take the lid off. Now this is very hot, so I'm going to use a couple of towels. The way you want to open this is actually away from your body, and so you release it, but you don't open it towards you. You want to open it away from you, just in case there's any pressure. You see there is some steam coming off of there. You don't want that to hit you in the face. And if you look down inside, you can see that our sweet potatoes are boiling inside. So that's still very, very hot. This is where the pot lifter, or I'm sorry, the jar lifter comes in. You can just pull them up like that. Shake it a little bit, and then you'll want to put it somewhere to cool. And we're going to move it over to the counter. Let me grab one of these real quick. All right, we're placing the last of our 4 jars. See, they're still hot. What we want to do is we'll want to tighten these rings around the lids. Remember that we had loosened those a little bit before, so we'll make sure these are all tightened up, because what we want is for this seal to be made. Sometimes these cans will seal, they'll pop in the middle of the process, and that's a good sign when they're pressure cooking. But sometimes it takes a little time after they're on the counter to seal. You want to make sure the counter is heat resistant, there's no wood or anything like that. Put a tea cloth down or something to be able to collect that water and keep the insulation of the heat from really getting onto that surface and ruining whatever you put it on. But these need to stay like this for about 24 hours.
Thank you all so much for coming along with us on this journey of pressure canning. We hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions about the whole process at all, please leave them in the comments below. We'd love to chat with you more about it. So, what we had left off with previously was we're going to pretend that 24 hours has gone by, right? And you're going to remove the rings. You're going to test to make sure, like this one, that the seal is completely intact, and then you're going to mark it so that you have the date.
This one is from last year, and it looks a lot like this one, so it's preserved very well. You want to make sure that you periodically check the seal, because anytime that the seal is broken, that means that it's not any good anymore. If the seal doesn't seal initially though, don't worry about it. You can always put this in the fridge and eat it right away, and it'll be fine.
Absolutely. And one last thing, these, once you open them, you're going to throw away the lids. They can't be used again, but you can buy new packs and then do your next round of canning. So good luck to you all. Have a wonderful day.